So now the really tough question here. We have been engaged in studying the Chinese work, the Chinese corpus, the Indian corpus, and of course, we are immersed in the Western corpus. So my question to you is, what is the Chinese corpus doing for you? Because if you look at these civilizations, at a very high level, there are three large civilizations which have been around for a long time and which have an identity of their own, like the Chinese, the Indian, and the West. They're about the same size in terms of the number of people. They have very long and complex histories. They have their own ways of doing things, which are quite different from each other. And most of us are not conversant with the other civilization. It's not just about doing tourism. It's not just about kind of seeing and saying, hey, that's interesting, but trying to understand what is that way of being? What is that way of living? What is that way of thinking? What is that sensibility? And what can you get from it? So my question to you is, these works, Tao Te Ching, Analects, and Art of War, the Chinese corpus that we are looking at so far, what are you getting from it? What does the West have to get from it? What do you have to get from it? So that's one question. And in terms of the relationship between the Tao, the Confucius, and this Art of War, if there is something that speaks to you more or less, so any thoughts about it? So what is the Chinese corpus doing for you, number one? And which of these three is speaking to you more? Another subpart, if you want, in some ways, the Lao Tzu and Confucius are the base philosophy, and Art of War is more kind of applied. Where do you see this Art of War as being more Taoistic, more Confucius, Confucian, or something else? So any thoughts about the Chinese corpus and your engagement with it? So would love to hear from anybody who would like to speak. So we're going to go with Steve, Evanik, James, Joe, and Quan. Start with Steve.
Okay, well, I wanted to, after I put in my thing first, and I wanted to wait to the end, but I'm going to say something really weird. This is an ancient culture. I don't think that Western people at all appreciate this ancient culture. I mean, if China would just open up and we could get to their archaeology, it would just be absolutely amazing. To me, I compare the Chinese culture, the great wisdom of the Chinese culture, their kanji, the way they approach life idiomatically and thematically, it's just a very powerful context. And I compare the Chinese culture with the Mayan culture. We just don't know anything about the Mayans either. And yet in all the mystical writings about Thoth and the Emerald Tablets, the Mayans are mentioned. The Chinese are not mentioned. What the heck? And so I'm just really looking at that. I love looking at the behind the words, maybe what were they really trying to say? And then seeing if I can, as a Western brain, kind of assimilate some of that stuff. That's where I am with it.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Steve. Next up is going to be Evanik, followed by James. Evanik.
Well, I think what I get from studying the Chinese culture is a different way of thinking, like a different mindset. I've mainly studied Western works. It's just what it is. And so studying another culture, and a culture that is so different, it has a different way of thinking, and a different way even of thinking about things, about land and loyalty and values and, all these things. I think it's so different from Western culture that I think it helps you think differently when you study these things. You just can't help but be influenced by it. So for me, studying Chinese culture is learning a different way of thinking and a different way of being, even, and a different way of thinking about being human and the purpose in the world. So that's the way I look at it.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Avanique. Next up is going to be James, followed by Joe. James.
Yeah, I like I really like the Tao Te Ching because it has a structure of dialectical relationship between heaven and earth, and you know, the way to understand forces in nature, and to understand the heaven and earth as a kind of unfolding of one's own life and work, and how it affects one's life and work. Confucius, I think, creates a constellation of values and responsibilities in a society in which one cannot count on one's autonomy always being perfect. In other words, a lot is imposed on the citizen in some societies, even perhaps in North American society, where we consider ourselves to be fairly free. We have kind of responsibilities to the society, and even close ties and so forth. But the idea that in Confucius we see a particular kind of society that is highly structured, but in which one succeeds by by paying close attention to the most important values, basically pursuing those values in a way which honors the constellation of responsibilities possessed by the social classes in that society. So I think you can apply that to other societies, like in the United States, for example. And so I think that applies to Western society very well. And so I think I've learned a lot from those texts.
Thank you. Thank you, James. Next up is going to be Joe, Quan, and Mike. Joe.
Yeah, I think that there are a number of reasons, and actually James just actually really captured it nicely, I think, to study these texts specifically. You know, I feel like studying Confucianism, it gives you a sense of morality, the morality of the day and the politics of the day, and, you know, the importance of ritual in certain instances. And you can see a lot of parallels between this Confucianism and some of the Greek writing about ethics. So you can see that's an interesting parallel. And in some ways, I feel like, you know, I like the Stoics a little more, but I appreciate Confucius. And I had a friend that actually has brought the Enchiridion, mentioned he had brought the Enchiridion to China, and they said, we already have Confucius. So that, you know, in other words, that was, it was unnecessary, but it was, but Taoism, as we had just covered it on Friday, you know, it really is about living in accordance with nature, and there's a spirituality and a tranquility that comes along with it. And there are so many things that you can take from that through all the verses. You know, and just to relate some of the things that we talked about, the one about leadership, I believe it was number 9. When, you know, what is a real leader? A leader is a person that is in the background, you know, not necessarily doing what everything. But, you know, that kind of relates to a certain degree. That's one way of looking at leadership. And then we have the strategic way and the militaristic way that we're looking at it through the art of war. So I think we're getting different perspectives on the culture. And ultimately, I think that if you look at these 3 things independently, it leads to your personal growth. I mean, it gives you different perspectives. And I think I think that it's hard to say. I mean, because I think that this is probably going to be the most practical text. Although you can argue that Confucius is a little bit more practical, but you can go back and forth. But ultimately, these three works are going to actually, I think, give us personal growth and give us a better understanding of Asian culture, not only ancient Asian culture or Chinese culture, current day culture. And I think that that's critical to understand another person's perspective. I had met some friends in New York that happened to be from Chinese background. And, we had some very good conversations about Confucius. And understanding that perspective that comes from here. So that's what I find that, in exploring these three together has really been helpful.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Next up is Quan. Quan, would love to hear what you have to say.
Yes, so to answer your first question, I was born in the Chinese matrix. So I would like to offer some of my perspective.
Yes,
from someone.
Quan, see, look, you and Kevin actually know the Chinese culture a lot more. So would love to hear, please speak at length. Go ahead.
Okay. So yes, right. I truly love to offer my perspective on the three foundational tradition having shaped Chinese civilization. And I would like first to say that Confucianism, Taoism, and what we call the Fa, okay, the principles and regulations of different schools of technicians, truly shape the Chinese mentality. And this is a timeless education, meaning that I would start with Confucius because the Westerner understand Confucianism as related to one man, a man who was born in 551 BCE and who died in 479 BCE. But if there's one thing that I would like to say about Confucianism is that Confucianism is not the product of one man, even if that man was especially glorious. But Confucianism in Chinese is called Ru Jia, the school of the scholars. And that school existed 30 generations before Confucius. And if we accept that one generation is about 30 years, it means that it existed practically 1,000 years before the birth of Confucius. And that tradition is the cultural legacy of the Shang-Yin dynasty and of the Zhou dynasty. The Shang-Yin dynasty began in 1600 BCE and what ended in 1046 BCE, and 1046 BCE was the beginning of the Zhou dynasty, having ended in 256 BCE. So it's the cultural legacy of the Zhou dynasty essentially for the personal growth, as Joe said, or since I like to use fancy words, for the epistemological development, okay, meaning to go to Yi Ren Dao. Yi is justice, what the Westerners call beauty in Platonic philosophy. Ren is humanity, what the Westerners call goodness in Platonic terminology. And Tao is truth or the way, but it's by metonymic transfer, it means the way. And the Indians have the same thing, since beauty, goodness, and truth, if I remember, Sundaram, Shivam, and Satyam in Sanskrit. So I would like to say, to go back to what you said, Shrikant, that what we can share with each other as human beings, that at the highest of our aspiration, we all want to go to beauty, goodness, and truth through different cultural expressions. And it's not a coincidence that the Indian, the Chinese, and the Greek meaning the Western tradition, share those three major timeless forms called beauty, goodness, and truth in English. And Confucianism is really for the personal development. And even if from 136 BCE, Emperor Wu of the Western Han Dynasty decided to adopt Confucianism as the imperial cultural matrix, and we have to distinguish the personal growth and the imperial control matrix, okay, because they are not exactly the same, of course. What is perceived in the West as the element of population control or of the state power is comes much more from the branch called legalism. And what has been translated as legalism is from the Chinese word fa. And as I said, legalism is a good translation because legalism is not law, okay? And legalism has to be understood as principles and regulations. And the Sun Tzu Ping Fa is an excellent example, okay? Because the last word is fa, okay? So it means principles and regulation for warfare, okay? So you can have principle and regulation for administration, for example, or you can have principles and regulation for the control of the state, or principle and regulations for diplomacy. And so you can have all kinds of things about principles and regulations. So it would be equal more or less in the West to specific disciplines, okay? Like the study of weapons, the study of fortification, the study of statecraft and administration, for example. So the different Fa is the third wings, if you want. But the two foundational reality or the two foundational doctrines for the personal development and for the harmony of the society are truly Confucianism and Taoism. Taoism, at the origin, the Confucianists and the Taoists were the same people, okay? But with time, the Confucianists went into more, develop more the statecraft dimension. And if I have to say things in a nutshell, Confucianism is for personal growth, for state development, and for family harmony. And Taoism is more for the understanding of yourself. I would say that Taoism would resemble much more to the sages of the Upanishad, for example, if I have to take a Indian rapprochement. And for, I would say, the understanding of the universe. Because many of the Confucian scholars during the 2000 year or 22 centuries of Imperial China, their scholarly activities had what we would call in the West a Confucian dimensions, meaning personal growth, family harmony, and social development, and a Taoist dimension, meaning research into the universe, into nature, into the principle of philosophical foundation of reality. So the division is quite artificial. If you take certain polymath, certain Chinese polymath like Shen Kuo, for example, of the Song Dynasty, they participated in government, but they also participated in what we would call in the West arts and sciences. So the division is a little bit arbitrary, according to me, because, and I don't want to say clumsy things, but I think it's more a Western division from the college tradition in the West, okay? Like Confucianism, okay? If they could have said simply Rujia, I would have preferred that.
Wonderful. Go ahead. Go ahead, Quan.
And I would say that from that, I would say that it's a good thing that this group exists, because we are at a moment when the three great civilizations of this world absolutely need to understand each other, okay? Because I think that in the 19th century and in the 18th century, there was a kind of opening, okay, with Leibniz, with Voltaire, and so on. And in the 19th century, because of political situations, because of a certain retardedness of China and India in terms of technology and so on, it was the occasion of many misunderstanding and a missed occasion to understand each other on an equal basis. And I think that the 21st century is truly the excellent occasion to try to understand each other, because the future of all mankind will depend very essentially on the mutual understanding of these three great group of human beings called the Western civilization, the Indian civilization, and the Chinese civilization. And I stop here.
Oh, wonderful. Kwan, that was just brilliant. Thank you. Thank you so much. And that's what we've been trying to do at 52 Living Ideas. And what happens is that you really need to commune with these different ways of being. You need to actually spend time not just communing with the text, looking at multiple translations, but actually hearing each other talk about it, responding. And because that envelope of oral communication on the top of the written material is what you really need in order to at least have a chance of grasping this. Partly, we are also not looking at these times. Modern times have the modern minds, whether in the West or in India or in China. I don't know enough about China, but it's certainly true of the modern minds in India, and certainly true of modern minds in the West, that they don't have a full appreciation of their own history. They don't fully get that. Like they don't get, like we're studying Gospel of John, or we studied Bhagavad Gita. And most modern Indians or most modern Americans don't really get that. So it's part of retrieval of the roots. And the form in which the same things exist today are very ritualistic and very formalistic. And there are all kinds of false dichotomies that are there, that are floating around. When you actually look at in the depth of it, they actually were integrated at one point, like nature and culture, for example, that is, separated out in two different ways. But just amazing comments. Thank you. Thank you so much. Next up is going to be Mike, Kevin, and Maritza. Mike.
Yeah, Kwan, I was so engrossed in what you were saying. I hope I can formulate my thoughts, because they've gone somewhere else. But basically, as I mentioned earlier, I looked at this text originally to become a better chess player. And I have been teaching mostly it's over 30 years now. And I'm looking at it now to become a better chess teacher. And that being said, I've had so many Chinese students over the years. I've been in their homes. I've become part of their families. And what the Chinese American chess players, scholastic chess players, have done, they have elevated the game to a point that I have never seen before. They are playing at levels that it's almost as if you need two separate divisions in terms of actual play. And I've been in so many of the homes and I watch how they study, and there's clearly a work ethic in place. I find these young kids are incredibly efficient at getting from point A to B, but there's something else. And I'm wondering, and maybe Kwan, you can help answer this question, is it something from the lineage, from the Eastern thought that's being passed down? Because these are mostly second and third generation Chinese Americans. Is there something in that path that's helping them elevate their game? So the work ethic is there. And again, this model of efficiency that I've noticed is there. But I sense there's something missing that I don't see, that I don't understand, because of my Western thinking that's being passed down, that these kids are absorbing from their grandparents, from their parents, that they're able to put into their level of play. And that's what I want to pull from this text, a better understanding of that process.
Let us do that. I want to, usually we are not doing questions here. We're just getting stuff, but I think I want to make an exception here, because I think your question is very deep. Because what it is really saying is that, how do these differences in the root culture show themselves in characters of people today that we see today? So, Quan, if you'd like to answer that, you're welcome to do that.
Yeah, I will try to answer in a nutshell. Okay, I think that it's a cliche, but I think that often we would say that the Westerner is a chess player, and the Asian is a Go player. Okay, I think it's a good cliche because it goes back a little bit to the former question that we had an hour ago. What is a victory? Okay, for a Westerner, a victory you have to take the king. For an Asian, a victory, you don't necessarily need to take the king, okay? You only have to take certain lands or territories that are important for you. And since I have been brainwashed in the two matrices, the Chinese one and the Western one, because I has been being educated in Hong Kong from 0 to 12 years old, and I came to Canada from 12 years old, okay? And I have always lived in Montreal since then. So even if my foundational matrix is Chinese, I would say that I was been quite brainwashed in the Western matrix too, since I came here at 12 years old. So I understand perfectly those two manner to think. And I would say it's a good thing because I give you a laughable example. For the Chinese, the place of honor is on the left side, okay? Because when the emperor faced south, his left side is on the east, meaning the direction of the rising sun. But a Westerner, the place of honor is on the right side because right in Latin, it's dexter and left is sinister, okay? I think it's a good thing because if we understand those things, the rivalry between East and West can be diminished a lot. Because since we don't have exactly the same symbolism, we can both win because we don't necessarily want the same thing.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. I mean, this is just such a rich conversation here. Kind of, the right brain and the left brain and the sequential versus visual. I mean, these are all issues that are there, behind all of everything, in kind of the relative way in which these different cultures engage with the world. So just wonderful. Thank you. Next up is going to be Kevin, Maritza, Brian, and Stephen. Kevin, please go ahead. Would love to hear your thoughts. Please take your time. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate your question. Inspire people think further. That's first. I remember Dao, the first couple sentence. Dao can be spoken is not eternal Dao. Name can be named, not eternal name. If you expand Marshall McLuhan, we shape our tools. The tools shape us. If you obviously consider language, that's one of them. The first, this is the first couple of them. We use different language, like Indian got so many 26, 22 states and official language. So that's each have individual culture. And Western now we use English, right? In Chinese, the Chinese character. That's the first. For example, I've been reading Chinese books. First, you read a story, but the character self, left-right structure or top-right, top-down. It's very important. What's come from. It's how one day I asked my Indian friend, what's that word come from? Do you have any meaning? Something like Chinese character. That part, I believe that earlier they have, but we just, but Chinese character mostly they have some characters. That's the first. I would say, if we still dig down the Chinese classics, the word Sao character is very important. That's the first. And today, I also, by the way, we occasionally got a question from Dao De Jing and Confucius, Today Art of War. Who is the audience? Who they talk to? That's not a problem for most Chinese audience. They first talk to you. You are the leader. So that's very, it's why here we normally we got a modern mind, a contemporary mind, who is very specific. I speak to you. So that kindness, but here they have default already speak to society, the ruler, also the ordinary people. So for me, I don't overspeak the Gita and the Western culture. I still learning, but mostly I speak from the Chinese. And by the way, for today, one question there's give me thinking like, well, where's technology in the five? Well, we got Dao, Tian, we guys call heaven, and D is earth, general and Fa. Where's the technology make the world? That's very important. That's a turnaround. The Western turnaround in India and China. You look at the GDP and population in 1800 before British and Nestle. That's the two richest country. Why? Because technology, the turning point. Why miss that part? And I don't want to overspeak it so long. Why in China it's 1990, I can't remember exact time. They invaded Beijing. It's last 2,000 people within 8 countries invaded China. The capital city over there. It's unimaginable. Why it's happened. It's happened. It's still now history used to be beautiful, destroyed by fire. What next? By another point I want to make is that's something, including myself. We use the word black on white. You try distinguish, help us understanding. Doesn't mean it is. That's about it. Trouble in English word have is, the being. That's I think the word itself got something, maybe linguistically shape our mind. It's yin and yang, inextricable. You cannot separate. If you don't have a top, where's bottom? That's why part of something like a Dao is we have valley, we have mountain. And like from small, you build along. So from the start, you build along. So those like very dialectic way thinking. But now we just get used to. Sri Lanka, you are right. I have to admit I'm right. I'm wrong. Even I mean, in my heart, I'm not agree with you. So that kind of competition, who is who? By the way, that's a little bit, sideways or speak. We only hear one voice, one language, one belief. We either get used to it. How about another way? Just for your curiosity, we can learn from it. That's how we learn. If I don't speak, I try listen carefully. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you for all these observations. I just want to comment on one thing that you started out with, Marshall McLuhan, the idea that we shape our tools and then the tools shape us. Just in the written language itself, see how different the ideograms that Chinese language uses, how different they are from alphabet, Western alphabet. Ideogram, you see it in one glance and you get the meaning right there in parallel. Everything is right there. A means nothing. B means nothing. You put together a word, you read it sequentially. You still don't get it because the sentence is not complete. You have to move like this, sequentially. Your mind has to move sequentially, and then you get it. That is a very different way of operation. So alphabetic language and the ideogrammic language is a very different way of operation. And I don't know all the implications of it, but it's a very, very rich field to be explored. Marshall McLuhan started with it. You know, he has made some observations on that, but there is a lot more to be said. Thank you, Kevin, and I really appreciate you, participating in all of this. You've, in the DAO meetups, because what happens is that, familiarity with this culture, with the culture, and being able to speak from it directly from your heart, and making it accessible to an audience, Western audience like us, who really do not have an ability to see those things directly. I mean, it's a tremendous thing. So thank you so much. Next up is Maritza, Brian and Penny, and Steve. Maritza.
Yeah, just a quick speak. I seen the one
Please.
website, one Western. He basically used all skills to make the Chinese character from to the computer, make computer way. So that's I've seen the one about the car too. In Chinese, so that's from the Oracle bone and and so on. It's very very beautiful. That's why one is yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Kevin. Next up is going to be Maritza.
I kind of remember the question.
I can restate the question. What are you getting from studying these Chinese classics, and how are you interfacing with the Tao, Confucianism, and the art of war?
Okay, I sort of remembered that. I really like seeing the almost more explicit nature of interweaving like statements on social norms and traditional norms and ethical values. It seems to me in the Eastern world, they are more explicitly interwoven into the very fabric of all these texts. And here in the Western world, it's more implicit. And I think it leaves a lot open for, it's all open for interpretation, but more gets lost. So, we have a harder time thinking what our ancestors may have been wishing for us to take forward in the Western culture, because these types of ephemeral things are not explicitly stated. I think there was, or perhaps, I don't know, but maybe it was more assumption made that naturally this would carry forth. And I really like that in many of these texts, Tao Te Ching, and here we're even seeing here the Art of War, and you see it in the Gita, there are these statements of comportment on a societal, cultural level, and a little bit the individual, but mostly on a cultural level. And it's even as the world grows and changes and we become, perhaps more individualistic, perhaps more, technologically advanced, and so many things change because they are, these things that are expressed to us as at a cultural level being the way forward. It's easier to view them through a modern lens, and it's easier to see how it's possible to assimilate them into the day-to-day. Whereas for some of the texts that one would read on the Western world, it's harder to do. They can sound a little bit more stale because technology has advanced past what we're reading. Here, it's talking about the 5 virtues of the commanders. Here in An Art of War, you have wisdom, sincerity, benevolence, courage, discipline. These are timeless. And so they can be propelled forward. They will take a slightly different shape, but there's richness to be found in looking at wisdom and what the ancestors worldwide meant when they said wisdom, and comparing it to how we use wisdom today. Like, I'm using that as an example, the word wisdom, but I think that in doing so, we are left with a far better understanding of some of these concepts. Like, if I'm going to pick on the word wisdom again, if I were only to read 1 or 2 texts from my side of the pond in my little land, and I get a concept of wisdom, it's not going to be anywhere near as robust or as deeply integrated as it by necessity has to be once I've gotten the definition or the understanding of how it was viewed across various different cultures. And because then I'm forced to kind of assimilate all of them, and what's left will leave me with a deeper and more ingrained concept. And so that's how I would describe what I'm getting out of looking at all these different perspectives, and why I think it's truly so valuable, because all of us are the better for it. Like, as we move forward together, looking at these different texts, we're leaving behind a less informed version of ourselves. And so we're all kind of growing and shaping into something better. Thank you.
Wow, wonderfully put, Maritza. I mean, the heart of this is what CJ talked about so often, and that of power of the multiple perspectives. And the multiple perspective is a visual metaphor, that you're seeing the same thing from multiple angles. But in some ways, you kind of have to get an elevated perspective, like not just from China, but you have to put enough of the Chinese thought or the Taoist thought in yourself that you rise up to a level that you have a better perspective on what you are. So there is the height involved, because otherwise it's not going to add as much. It has to have that enough heft of saying, okay, I kind of get at least a little bit about what Lao Tzu is trying to say. And then from that perspective, you can look at yourself, or you can look at anything else. And the odd thing that happens is that what you looked at, which was once familiar to you, starts to look very different, because you're now seeing it from this perspective and that perspective. And suddenly something that you thought you were extremely familiar with starts to look dramatically different, because you see connections. Another metaphor that I like is that of a network or a connection. What you're doing is that you're getting a whole new set of connections. You're connecting to what you know. And in that process, that entire network is completely transformed. It's a far, I like all these metaphors, because, it's very difficult to describe what goes on in our consciousness. And these metaphors, like visual metaphors, for example, are brilliant at doing that. But then, like a network metaphor adds to that, because I think a network metaphor actually speaks to what happens, because it's not just that you're seeing the same thing, but the network is entirely different. Everything's actually how things are flowing now in your mind is completely different, because you have the idea of the Tao, for example. If you get just the idea of the Tao, it is such a powerful way of rethinking everything between nature and culture and how they dance with each other. So it's just incredible. And you're absolutely right that this is it just enriches each of us. So thank you so much. Next up is Penny, followed by Steve. Penny.
Hi. well, I love what everybody said. I'm just going to, my viewpoint. Well, I've always liked different cultures, different times. When I was a teenager, I discovered Pearl Buck and her books on China. And I've read every single book in the library on Pearl Buck and subsequently other novels on China. We've had several Chinese friends, still have Chinese friends. I was able to spend a couple weeks in China. And so, I wanted to, when the opportunity came to study these great Chinese classic texts, which I'd never really studied, but you knew they were foundational for their culture. I wanted the opportunity to do it. Here in 52 Living Ideas, it's a very great format because you get to, you read it, you kind of get your own idea, but then you learn so much more because other people question and think about things a lot more sometimes than I do when I read them. But anyway, so it was a really good opportunity to see the Asian viewpoint, the Chinese viewpoint, how they look at the world, and kind of the spiritual and philosophical underpinning of those cultures. Because talking with some of these friends, they say, oh, people aren't religious in China, and they ask us kind of about our Western religion and stuff like that. But definitely they have a cultural underpinning and a way of looking at the world that is a little bit different, and so it's just a very good opportunity to study this, to kind of go back and think about my friends, and then just to get a new viewpoint on the world too, because I got a little tired of the Western viewpoint.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Penny. I wanted to say one more thing here about what Jason and Amon are doing. Going back to the original text is crucial. It's crucial because if you get it, I think you can get some things from a translation, but actually going to the original language, what you can get is something really spectacular. Actually, I'm going to demonstrate it on Thursday because in Gospel of John, I decided to go back and look at the Attic Greek. It was just 4 sentences that we are going to look at. And I looked at all the key words in Attic Greek. And it is stunning how the text looks. Now, of course, I am not a Greek scholar. This is the first time I'm trying it. But even with that, when you go back and look at the actual original language and try to see its roots, try to study the history of each of the words, because actually the words are living things that grew up in a certain way. And when these works were written, they had a very specific meaning. Those words themselves turned into something else over time. And then when they are translated into another language, they are translated in some other way. So all kinds of connotations and denotations and connections between the original set of words that were used to describe something are all lost. A lot of them are lost. Some things come through, but a lot is lost. So it is like going back to the original language is like archaeology. You're actually peeling the layers of something to see where the same thing that you're seeing at the top of the Grand Canyon, where did it come from? And the view is completely different. So I'm just so grateful to Jason and Amon for doing this. So just wanted to say that. Thank you. Next up is going to be Steve.
Okay, I'm busting a gut. What you said about going back to look at the Greek in John, I've done that and done some other stuff at a light level. In Matthew, it says, be ye therefore perfect, right? The Greek word is be ye therefore fully developed. And if one goes back to the Aramaic word is be ye therefore all embracing. And what boggles my mind is how the Greeks, I think I want to, another thing, and this comes back to my statement about we have no idea about this Chinese culture and where it came from. Do you know that Native American, in the Lakota language, the name for Mars was the frightened moose? Now, why would the Indians call Mars frightened moose? Well, if a moose is moving along a mountain and you frighten the mountain, it'll jump out and create a giant circle and come back to right where it was when it was on its journey and then continue. Now, how would the Native Americans know that Mars went into retrograde? You know, we put down these cultures, and this is where I say, like the Mayan culture, of course, Native American, South American, and North, they came from the Mayan culture. They built pyramids. We don't understand that culture at all. And yet when the Native Americans took that heritage, they just became a simple people physically, integrated with the environment and really into personal, individual, spiritual development. And Kevin talked about yin yang, and somehow through the Greek and the Romans, Descartes, we went into the Christian church, took over, and suddenly Descartes had to come up with this dualism concept and separate us from divine feminine, separate us from nature. And of course, that's what had the Western culture be so aggressive about, like, building stuff. The Chinese invented fireworks in 200 BC. They invented clocks in 700 AD, and it wasn't, the Western culture didn't invent a clock until 1200 AD. I mean, if we just get a glimpse of what this Chinese culture is offering us, I think it's going to blow everybody's mind. I think the Chinese, we don't understand how Confucianism has been applied by the current Chinese regime, but this idea of integrating and family and being one with nature, and the idea of having a yin and a yang in everything. I also want to mention that in Hebrew, even the words in Hebrew, the letters in Hebrew have a numerical and an ideogrammic meaning. So the word Hebrew A is alpha, and it's also the number one. And the last letter in the Hebrew alphabet is omega. And when a Hebrew person puts together those words, they mean something. You can check the value numerically and idiomatically to determine what that word means. For example, the word man and woman are the same word, just reversed. And so we as Westerners have just fragmented ourselves so much from reality. And it's so cool to see us reintegrating ourselves by becoming aware of this. Quan, I had a question for you. What age could a Chinese person who's reading Chinese, what age would they have to be to have a basic understanding or a good understanding of this book? And then, was this book written in, because you put up your etymology there, was this book written in ancient Chinese or in current Chinese? Those are my two questions to Quan, if you don't mind. And thank you for letting me share.
Let's do quick answers, Quan.
Thank you so much.
Yes. A quick answer would be, when you say that book, do you mean the Sun Tzu Ping Fa?
This book we're reading today, yeah.
Okay, if the Sun Tzu Ping Fa, I would say that to read the book, if you have a good teacher or if you have a good grandfather to go with you, I would say 7, 8, 9 is possible. The first time I read that book with my grandfather, I was 4 years old, but I have a special grandfather, so maybe it's different. But to understand the philosophical context, I would say 12, 13, 14, okay? Because I would say it's in the classical Chinese education, the child, meaning from 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years old, will learn the text and the characters, okay? He will reproduce the characters, but he will not necessarily understand the philosophical meaning, not until, even for very bright children, 11, 12 years old, okay? For that kind of, because the Sun Tzu Ping Fa is not only a technical manual for warfare. It is also a philosophical text. So I would say that to understand the philosophical text, even for bright children, 11, 12 years minimum, I would say. But in the classical Chinese courses, you learn the characters and the content of the text before you can understand that text.
Thank you. I want to give an example of how different an original language is. We're going to be studying verse 14 of chapter 15 of Gospel of John. It says, "You are my friends if you do what I command you." Now, I've always thought that a very odd statement, because when I look at Jesus's character across the Gospel of John, he's always asking people, do you want to be healed? What are you seeking? Do you want to leave? He's very much asking other people. So I said, what is this word? So let me try. And the word is entelomai. So he says, you are my friends if you do what I entelomai you. Now, entelomai is translated as enjoin. Okay, you're enjoining people. You're inviting them. You're charging them with a responsibility, which is very different from command. Again, if you go further, zoom in to the word, entelo is the root of it. En means in, and telos. By the way, I was talking to a friend of mine. It was Aristotle who actually coined the term. So Jesus is using the term of Aristotle. Telos is purpose. So if you are in purpose, same purpose as me, then you're my friend. So if you share the same goal, and if you are in the same direction, now that's a very different kind of a meaning than what you get from command, because there is all kinds of paraphrase, all kinds of implications, connotations of the word command, which are not there in the original. It is all focused on the purpose and whether you are in on the purpose, whether you say, yes, that is my purpose. Are you saying yes to that? So that's a very simple example of how, going back to the original, you see a very different meaning. All right, let's go with Mark, followed by Joe. Mark.
Thanks, Shrikant, for posing these challenges for us. I would like to just quote or paraphrase from the Tao Te Ching. Man follows the earth follows the universe, and the universe follows only the Tao. We only have one earth, but we have more than one way of dividing it up and understanding it. So if you consider the three traditions that you asked about, the Western, the tradition of India, and of the Far East, they all have different ways of carving up the world, but we're all human. So I feel that if we are to survive as a unity, we can only survive either all together or not at all. So perhaps one way that we can at least make survival likely is to understand all of the perspectives and viewpoints. I think Penny mentioned the different perspectives and viewpoints. And this is really what's inspiring me to participate. Thank you.
Wonderful. Wonderful. I want to let me put this. The most beautiful capturing of the sentiment that you said, that you expressed right now, that I've seen, is by Buckminster Fuller. And he calls it, he says, universe is the aggregate of all humanities consciously apprehended and communicated non-simultaneous and only partially overlapping experiences. So what he's saying is that, I mean, actually that word universe, keep that aside for a moment, but he's saying that this integration of all viewpoints, you're saying yes to all the viewpoints, and they're partially overlapping. They're not, and you are trying to, it's the aggregate. You're trying to say, take all of them in, and you're trying to see what kind of picture emerges from that. You can call it the global culture, you can call it global conception, you can call it, the universe of concepts, but that is what was the quest of Buckminster Fuller. And that's exactly what we are trying to do in our own way. And the beautiful thing is that, each of us here are trying to do that individually, and we're trying to do it collaboratively. And all the work that each individual is putting in their own quest of understanding is giving life-giving, life-giving energy to others. And it bounces off each other. There is a synergy to it. And what we can do as a result of it is so much more than what any of us individually can do. So you're welcome to be, I'm just grateful that you're here. It's just amazing to see, great people just show up and have this level of conversation. So thank you so much. Next up is Joe.
Yeah, I just wanted to two things. Yeah, I mean, I agree with you as well as the idea of everybody showing up. The individuals that show up are such a high level. And I just wanted to highlight one in particular thing is like this idea of going through the translation with Jason. And what a privilege that is on so many different levels, because we not only get the methodology that they went through, that Aman and Jason had gone through, and then we have Quan. We're fortunate enough to have Quan that also offers his perspective, and each time you're just getting a little bit more out of you get so much more out of that translation discussion than you're not going to get it anywhere else. That's what makes this particular meetup unique, where if we were to be anywhere else, we would just be reading it and we wouldn't be getting that context, and we wouldn't have those three individuals in particular dialoguing about giving us their historical, their logic behind why they would choose a certain word. You see Jason's humility in the sense that if you can come up with a better word, please let me know. And and it's a challenge to all of us. So I that if as far as this particular forum adds another level of our understanding of not only the culture but the experience that we're having with going through this particular text. So I think that had to be brought up. I thought it was it's a privilege. I know it's always been a privilege to work with them, and but I think that it needed to be noted and highlighted, because I think that it also elicits some very good questions as well. People read the commentaries and they'll maybe say, well, this person said this, and then they'll have a great dialogue back and forth. So anyway, I thought I would add that, because I thought when you were talking about the translations themselves, just how important that part is to this particular meetup.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much, Joe. And thank you for, anchoring this meetup as well. So Really appreciate that. And thank you very much, everybody. Thanks particularly to Kwan. I really appreciate your overview, and thank you for, it was just a fantastic overview. Really, really appreciate that. And thank you, Kevin, for your thoughts. And thank you, everybody. It's just so amazing to see this. Always grateful to see all these great folks. So thank you, and really looking forward to this series. See you soon. Bye.